Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited to reintroduce my guest today, Gary Kidgell. He has been on this channel many times. He has studied esoteric teachings for 40 years. He's also a professional esoteric or soul-centered astrologer. And today we are going to discuss his new book, The Rising Signs, Gateway to the Higher Self. Welcome, Gary.
It's a pleasure to be here as always, Suma, and to connect with you again. Thank you very much.
Same here, Gary, and congratulations on your new book. I remember you have been working on this for a while. So please introduce us to what this book is about.
Well, absolutely. In my opinion, true astrology serves a very similar role, in fact, an identical role to meditation. It puts us in touch with what the wisdom teachings call the higher self. Jung, Astrology, and others would call it the self, which is seeking to fulfill the planetary and ultimately the universal intent. And the astrological chart is a map of the psyche. It is our personal mandala, which shows how we may unify the mortal aspect of our being with the immortal aspect of our being, which indeed the self or the soul has chosen the circumstances of the incarnation. It has incarnated when the astrological conditions are appropriate, both in terms of its purpose for the life ahead and also in terms of the karma it's seeking to dispense with in this particular life. And the chart is our mandala, then it's our route to wholeness of being, where soul and personality can be unified. This is, of course, individuation of Jung, the psychosynthesis of Roberto Assagioli, the higher initiations of the wisdom teachings, the hieros gamos of the alchemists, and so on.
What is I know esoteric astrology usually ties to the seven rays theory. Is that same with the book?
Very good question, Suma. Yes, I actually include a chapter on the rays in this book. The rays are the great universal builders. If we look at creation, we have the Om, and then this gives rise to what we call the three major rays of aspect: will and power, love, wisdom, active intelligence, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, if we want to look at Indian teachings. And from the three arises the seven. And these seven rays are the great universal builders. Everything within our universe arises through the interplay of these rays, the various planes of creation, solar systems, planets, and the human constitution. There is a ray for the soul, the personality, the mind, the emotions, the physical body. And so, yes, planets are governed by particular rays, and the signs of the zodiac represent combinations of particular rays. So this is all very important. Yes, the seven rays are extremely relevant to esoteric astrology.
So how does this book help in connecting a person to their higher self? What are the astrological symbols that are kind of
Well, when Alice Bailey wrote her book, Esoteric Astrology, as well as talking about new planetary rulers or affinities between planets and signs which differ from traditional astrology, she emphasized that the higher self sounds its note through what we call the rising sign or the ascendant. This is the sign located on the eastern horizon at the time of the subject's birth. Traditional astrology correctly describes the sun sign as representative of one's personality, the basic psychological fuel which they run on. And esoteric astrology does not conflict with this, but it states that the spiritual purpose for the life ahead is related to the rising sign or ascendant. And my book talks about the spiritual purpose, the challenges and rewards relating to each of the 12 rising signs. I also give brief examples at the end of each chapter. I kept the examples quite short because I wanted the book to be accessible to anyone interested in treading the spiritual path. I didn't want the reader to get lost in astrology, but it is of benefit to astrologers. They will see the methodology of the particular form of esoteric astrology that I practice.
So what are the patterns you're seeing, especially for the collective or humanity? Are there any like big turning points?
You're asking me a general question just now, but I feel at the moment with Pluto in Aquarius, Neptune in Aries, and Uranus in Gemini, there are favorable angles between these at the moment, but I can see a lot of upheaval. Pluto in Aquarius, of course, Aquarius rules the internet, technology, etc., and we are in the Aquarian age. But it would be very naive for someone to think, oh, suddenly we're in the new age. It's like the sun in the tarot where everyone's dancing in the light. Far from it. We're laying seeds for the future here. And I think I said this to you in our last interview, that I feel the magic that's been written about in the past in occultism, etc., is likely to be performed through technology. And I believe we're going to look at immense changes here. But just like everything else with humanity, it all boils down to how psychologically developed we are. The problems lie within the human psyche, and technology like AI, which is your field of expertise, of course, is a fantastic tool. It can do all the mental heavy lifting for humanity. It can be extremely creative and so on. It's how we use this, but it presents a wonderful opportunity for us to now exercise the higher abstract mind, and of course the potential in terms of work, etc., diagnostics, all these things is just absolutely fantastic. I was actually reading a couple of days ago, I'm digressing, but my father passed away through motor neuron disease, and of course, you have these billions of neurons in the brain and trillions of synapses in the. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but when I think of AI, that what that can achieve there in terms of whole groups of scientists trying to work things out there, I think it's absolutely incredible. And I think also when we think of these things and what AI is going to do, it will make us more aware of the consciousness of the divine, which is immeasurably beyond our own. But the AI is going to expand human consciousness, and hopefully our appreciation of the divine workings will be enhanced.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think, of course, we're witnessing great fluctuations in politics. Aquarius and esoteric astrology rules fluctuations because the glyph goes up and down, it zigzags. And Pluto is related to the propensity for power. It is a first-ray planet. It also rules the unconscious, but when it's retrograde, it brings things to the surface. And we're witnessing this to a great extent at the moment. I view it as a great opportunity for us to learn more about the human psyche, and particularly the first ray of will and power. We should be using will to implement the purpose of the divine, connecting with the self, which gets back to the astrology as a map of the psyche, and fulfilling its purpose.
I completely agree with you on, and one of the things that you mentioned about AI, it's it's fascinating how fast things are happening, and I do see a lot of potential for a lot of positives that can come out of AI, and I hope it goes in that direction versus the negative direction.
Of
And
course.
I wanted to ask you one more general question. I do want to come back to your book again,
Of
because we are
course, yeah.
already talking about this topic. I would love to know, are there any astrological indicators on AI becoming self-aware?
Becoming self-aware. Not that I am aware of per se. It's a fascinating question, wonderful conundrum, because as far as I see it, you may correct me here, obviously there's inspiration and intuition that has led to the development of AI, but I view AI as an effect rather than a cause. So I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible and stick to first principles. How can an effect behave like a cause? Just as the higher self creates a personality, the personality seeks to relate to the higher self. But are you really asking if AI can become autonomous? And as some sci-fi writers have said, machines will take over the world, and for good or for bad.
Yeah, just curious, like, is there anything, if you're noticing anything in astrological charts that is kind of like an anomaly, sort of like a glitch in the matrix?
Not as such. You've really thrown a curveball at me there, Suma, because it's not something I've really looked at. But when we look at the chart, of course, we have Leela's dance in Hindu teachings where everything is Maya, but you're looking at the existence and its ever-changing flux and how we may attune to that, ultimately as a means of attaining transcendence. But in terms of AI, in that respect, I don't see anything as such there. But as you say, I'm not copying out here, but the speed at which AI is developing, the acceleration in human consciousness is going to be enormous. And as I said, astrology and meditation, ultimately, it's all about connecting with the universal intent and ultimately realizing that we are all aspects of the same source and seeing that both in ourselves and everybody else. These are tools which ultimately enable us to apprehend what Helena Blavatsky called the voice of the silence, what Hindu teachings call samadhi, the ultimate Tao of Taoism, the nirvana of the Buddhists, and so on. Can AI lead us there? Well, I believe it can do a lot of heavy lifting where we don't have to do so much straining with the lower mind, because all these great works are being put online. You've probably come across the Gutenberg Press, who are, with books go out of copyright. They're putting all these great philosophical and esoteric works online, available for free. And you will know this much better than me, that AI is just such a wonderfully advanced search engine, as well as having great creative capacity. So if that is all online, it is at the disposal of us, whereas mentally we can furnish our psyche with it, whereas in the past, perhaps I'd have to visit the British Library to access all these works. I'd have to either catch a train or fly down to London and so on, whereas it's just here, it's there in the flash. And therefore, I think it gives us all this material which we can ponder upon, in our intuition can utilize as a springboard. I think Neptune in Aries is relevant there as well, because Aries rules the mind and ideas, and Neptune in its higher aspect is very mystical. and it can give us great insight, particularly when it is retrograde. At least that's what esoteric astrology would say.
Great response. And in terms, coming back to your book,
Yeah.
how does it all tie together? For example, how has this book helped you in your own personal life in connecting with the higher self?
Well, really, it's the methodology I outline in the book and utilizing an understanding of the rising signs, which has been outlined by my mentor, the English esotericist Douglas Baker, that I have become acutely aware of my soul's purpose, not just through using the intellect, but also through dream symbols that relate to my rising sign of Libra. And this has assisted me greatly. I mean, that's not what my book is about per se, but Baker's astrology, it provides one with a key towards interpreting the language of the unconscious. As Jung demonstrated, the higher self communicates to us through symbolism. Archetypes or divine ideas, we can trace these back to the seven rays ultimately, are represented within the human psyche as symbols. And symbolism provides a means by which we may exercise the higher mind and ascertain our purpose in life. Difficult at the moment, dream interpretation, etc., but in accord with Rupert Sheldrake's concept of morphic resonance, the more of us that do this, it's like the 100th monkey syndrome, we'll create energy reservoirs within the unconscious, which will assist those who follow us, which is exactly the same when we tread the spiritual path, of course. I would have to say I rate Jung's work as the most important of the 20th century. Then there's Joseph Campbell with his wonderful work on myth symbolism. And I would also have to mention Rupert Sheldrake for his concept of morphic resonance. I'm not from a scientific background, but I'm aware of the principles, and I think what he has introduced there is very profound and new. It's a development on Jung's work, as is Baker's astrology. Getting back to my book, gosh, I can talk when I get started. I outline something that Douglas Baker called the soul's purpose aspect. There are three vectors related to this. There's the rising sign, the placement of the esoteric planetary ruler by sign and house, and then one looks at the sign on the cusp of that house and that particular esoteric ruler. So in my case, I'm a Libra ascendant. The esoteric ruler Uranus is in Leo in the 10th house. Leo is on the cusp of the 10th house, and I have the sun in Scorpio in the 1st house, forming a dynamic, stressful square angle to Uranus. And my relationship with the higher self has not been without challenges, and I've often been challenged to display poise and equanimity in public in the face of challenge and difficulty, or at least things that I perceived as difficult. But I do feel I've grown through a series of repetition of challenges. I have the Sun conjunct Jupiter and Venus, and this has helped me to shed light on my personality and to realize my true partner. Libra rising, partnerships, the true partner is the soul or higher self. But knowledge of the rising signs and the soul's purpose for each of these can be extremely valuable. If one reads the book, they'll find that the purpose for each rising sign, aspects of that will apply to them because it all relates to the spiritual path. But if they read about their specific rising sign, that will be more resonant. And then if an esoteric astrologer versed in the methods I am, where to look at their chart, they could go deeper with it, considerably deeper. So it's really a tool for self-development, but always with the intent of aligning to that of the universe.
And
as I say, just like meditation.
can you give examples of what are some of the indicators that the charts can give a person on self-development that could
Of
potentially?
course. Well, as a map of the psyche, I suppose I'll simplify this. A good way of understanding the chart is to see the planets as representative of various psychological drives. They are colored and conditioned by the particular signs in which they are found. They have a primary focus on the area of the chart, the house in which they're found, and the geometrical angles between them indicates either the ease or the tension between these particular planets. It might be helpful to think of perhaps the Greek or Roman gods. Well, let's say the Greek gods on Mount Olympus. And if they have an easy, say, a trine aspect between Hermes and Zeus, then generally the mind is going to expand easily. Jupiter, Zeus rules Aquarius. One perhaps can lead a group in creative ways. One has an expansive creative mind that is very suited to psychology and so on. Now, if there were a more dynamic square angle, that could be just as valuable in terms of promoting spiritual growth. But we would expect a lot more mental stress under those conditions. Stress can produce growth, of course, but it basically gives an indication of how the various drives within the human psyche interact, and ultimately how these can be utilized as a means of expressing the intent of the higher self, which has chosen the chart as a means of expressing its intent. And this is always aligned to the intent of the planetary consciousness. Sometimes what one might call a difficult chart can be more spiritually beneficial than an easy one, because it's just the way the human condition is. We tend to grow through stress and challenge. If you're born beautiful and affluent, it usually takes something to distract you from everyday life because it's so attractive and lovely. And usually challenges cause us to turn inwards, which can be a very positive thing, particularly if we understand the process here.
This question, it's a bit off topic, but I'm curious what you have to say about it. Since we are talking about consciousness expansion and psyche, it seems like a lot of older traditions, they talk about pineal gland and the importance of pineal gland activation. And since we also talked briefly about dream symbols and how DMT can trigger those kind of dream states, do you think pineal gland activation is something that could genuinely affect our consciousness, or is it a myth?
Well, I'll take this conversation to the country of your birth, because I believe relates to the chakras, and the chakras have their counterparts in the endocrine glands, and the pineal gland relates to the Sahasrara chakra, the 1,000-petal jewel at the crown of the head. But I believe, perhaps this is my Church of Scotland Presbyterian upbringing, and I will quote Douglas Baker: one cannot ripen an apple with a blowtorch. We unfold in a natural way through our various incarnations, transmuting the energies of lower chakras, solar plexus, astral, into heart, unconditional and inclusive love, compassion, wisdom. The sexual energy of the sacral chakra is transmuted into the creativity of the throat chakra. When the love wisdom of the heart chakra is focused in the brow, one becomes wise and enlightened. And all this while, one is drawing the energies of the spiritual planes of consciousness into the aura. I won't use technical wisdom teaching terms, but I can elaborate if you wish. But this will eventually bring down the fire of spirit, which will coax the Kundalini serpent from the base chakra, the Muladhara, up the spine, up the central nadi, the Sushumna nadi, leading to enlightenment and the opening of the thousand petal lotus. This, of course, being related to the pineal gland. You mentioned DMT. Regarding psychedelics, etc., I feel many people have been given a glimpse of the inner world through psychedelics, myself included, not very often. I very quickly felt, well, there's the proof this exists. Don't keep, it's not a crutch. Each to their own, but I personally would stick, if someone had to push me, I would go for Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, as creating the foundation for enlightenment. And yet leading a good, wholesome life from a Christian perspective, expressing virtues and negating the vices, and meditation, drawing one closer to the divine, building the bridge between soul and personality, bringing them into closer alignment, and astrology, probably the purest of the occult sciences, as a means of determining one's relationship with the universe and what the intent is for the life ahead. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of psychedelics, but there are certain eminent American academics who have written on the subject. I'm not in a position to criticize them. I haven't studied the work, but I would not go down that route myself. Thinking of mythology and the adventures of Odysseus when he returns to Ithaca, symbolic of the personality experiencing what we call divine unrest and wanting to return home to the divine state. At one point, he visits the island of the lotus eaters. They're eating this beautiful fruit which casts a spell on them. And we can all interpret symbols in different ways, but right away I think of the imbibing of hallucinogenic substances and so on in that respect. So I feel if one is doing that too often, they're damaging the etheric webs related to the chakras, and in subsequent lives, there will be some process of correction required, whether it produces idiosyncrasies in the nervous system or whatever. I can't be sure. I'm not medically qualified, but I'm really using my background, the teachings I received primarily from my mentor, Douglas Baker, to give you that answer.
Maybe it serves as like a good initial glimpse, and as
that is my personal view.
I think it was Alan Watts who said, like, once you get the message, hang up the phone.
I think that's excellent. I would go along with that entirely. Yeah, that would be my view as well. I think also I was about to say, in an ironic, Scots, sarcastic way, we're renowned for that. Did Shankara ever take hallucinogenics, or Buddha, or Plato? But then again, the Eleusinian mysteries, some people stated, certainly the lesser mysteries, that people did imbibe hallucinogenics. But again, that your Alan Watts quote, once you're aware of those inner worlds, you then start doing the work to reach them naturally. That is my opinion. And you're in control. Yeah, you're in full control then. Are you in full control when you're taking hallucinogenics? I'm not sure. I would be concerned. That's why, say, back in the day, I was a bit young to be involved in the hippie counterculture, but they were taking LSD and talking about good trips or bad trips. And it's really because you can hit higher astral level or lower astral level, and lower astral can be very chthonic, it's very dense dense vibrations, the higher will feel almost heavenly. Some people might argue that that's a reflection of feelings of guilt in the psyche, and we're all entitled to an opinion, but I still stand by my original comment, and I would say Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are the best example of how to tread the path.
And are there any astrological indicators for that to happen to more and more people naturally?
I think, yes, absolutely. I have a prominent Neptune in my first house, which doesn't form particularly favorable angles. It certainly made me very impressionable and idealistic when I was younger. And it's kind of a warning sign for me in that respect. I also have quite a dynamic Pluto, which is related more to illicit drugs, etc. But we can see that in everyone's chart, and whether it's, well, I would say it's never favorable long term, but what sort of challenges one is going to face if they're going to be involved in something of that nature. I think personally, when the higher self is making sufficient contact, why do you need to use, substances? They're not, I don't believe they're, except in maybe very rare instances, that they're taking consciousness up to the level of the higher self. I believe it's more at the astral emotional plane that they're seeing these things. Some people may disagree, of course, but that is my opinion. But yes, in the chart, just as you can see where people are susceptible to alcohol, etc., if people have escapist tendencies, or if Pisces in the 12th house is greatly emphasized, if they're not making self-sacrifices, fulfilling what Indian teachings call dharma, there is that danger of self-undoing, which often comes about through alcohol, the imbibing of illicit substances, and so on.
And coming back to
three things in the chart. It's the ability of the astrologer to perceive it. I don't claim to be an oracle, but there are, well, everything can be seen by a proficient astrologer, and a good esoteric astrologer can certainly offer guidance here. But I always see the chart as a map of the psyche indicating one's potential. It's not telling one's life story per se, because one always has free will within the constraints of the archetypes as indicated in their chart, and how the chart relates to the movement of the planets in the heaven and its unfoldment through techniques like secondary progressions. I don't want to be too technical with astrological language, but sorry, I'm cognizant of the fact there might be a few astrologers listening and they might want to hit me with some questions at a later date. But no, everything is there within the chart, and we can see all of these things, one's potential and so on, potential discord within the chart, potential harmony, but ultimately, from a spiritual point of view, it's all about putting the personality together as an instrument of the higher self. And the placement of the sun sign indicates the personality, the ascendant indicates the purpose of the soul. These two are interrelated, of course.
Are there any ideas in your book that or practices that could benefit people that you would like to share today?
Okay. Scorpio rising in esoteric astrology it's the mentally toughest of the rising signs. It also presents the most challenges. I mean, we're all going through a series of lives. We're all going to experience the energies of the different rising signs and so on. But Scorpio tends to place the spiritual aspirant in very challenging circumstances. They often have to keep, metaphorically, picking themselves up off the floor. But this this can fast track one's spiritual growth, and also through these lessons and the deep inner strength these people contain, they have the ability to inspire others. Others intuit their inner strength, and it actually brings a confrontation between what the wisdom teachings call the dweller on the threshold, the accumulation of personality attributes over one's previous lives, and the spiritual aspirants. These challenges come to the surface because transformation is taking place. They have to be dealt with in accordance with the universal law. So that is how Scorpio rising would work. It's very challenging, but it gives this ability in terms of accelerating one's growth. And of course, when one is being challenged like that, it also gives the opportunity to be aware of the transient nature of everything and to view these things as a process rather than being emotionally entangled. And Scorpio rules things that happen suddenly. We say stop signs. One may be going down a certain route that's inimical to the soul's intent. So a metaphorical stop sign, bang, out of nowhere. It can be hurtful and painful, but they pick themselves up and hopefully then drawn onto the correct course. But also, as well as sudden obstacles, it rules sudden insight and sudden flashes of inspiration from the spiritual planes. And we say with Scorpio rising, an old adage, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And that is particularly applicable to that rising sign. But each of the rising signs have their challenges and rewards, but that one in particular presents a lot of trials for the spiritual aspirant. For someone who's not treading the path, the expression of these archetypal energies is completely different. But for Scorpio, it's fourth ray. Predominantly, we say art and harmony through conflict. That is the ray of humanity where growth occurs through strength. Usually one is on an even keel, then a challenge comes along and the stress becomes almost unbearable. Then they break through to a higher plateau of consciousness. Then it's an even keel for a little while. Then another challenge occurs, and so on and so on. And that is really the story of humanity as well, which is governed by the fourth ray. But Scorpio, we'd consider the rays as well. And Mars, its esoteric ruler, is a six-ray planet, so it emphasizes the need for emotional control and harnessing emotional energies, the energies concentrated within the solar plexus chakra, harnessing them towards applying force towards breaching frontiers of consciousness and ultimately elevating these energies to the higher counterpart, the heart chakra, where we express unconditional love rather than selfish or jealous love, compassion, empathy for all life forms, and so on.
What's the purpose of that struggle for Scorpio rising sign?
Because we have accumulated karma, we've expressed personality attributes over many lives. Initially, the soul or higher self has wanted the personality to become fully engaged with matter. Then it reaches saturation point and one is being called onto the path. And so what has gone before must be dealt with karmically. Ultimately, the higher self is looking to create a perfected vehicle of expression, or as perfect as one can be in the physical body. So these challenges come about as a means of dealing with the past, but also in terms of helping us to grow and to attain higher levels of consciousness.
And have you yourself or any of your clients experienced some of these readings from charts, like save their life or kind of ease up some of these struggles because of being aware of their astral chart?
Yes, very much so. I think also it greatly helps people to know there is meaning behind their lives and the challenges and the difficulties that they are facing. Many people say that I could accept this if it had meaning to it. And I think astrology, you're looking to give the person meaning, but you're also seeking to make them aware, at least in esoteric astrology, of what the higher self is seeking to achieve. With each of the rising signs, the higher self will place one into certain circumstances where they are really challenged or given opportunities to express the positive qualities of that particular rising sign.
And in terms of at a collective level, is there a planet that represents soul lessons for the collective or humanity? And if so, which planet do you believe that humanity is stuck right now?
Well, they all represent lessons in different ways because they all represent archetypes related to aspects of the human psyche, or which permeate the human psyche, and therefore they're all relevant. In esoteric astrology, Aquarius and its esoteric ruler Jupiter rule humanity as such. We're in the Aquarian age, which also rules groups. And there is a great challenge for us to relinquish the ego, which is Leo, not that that's wrong per se, but to ultimately identify with the group purpose and ultimately the purpose of humanity. And I think we're at a very early stage in that respect. But I do believe a lot of the challenges and tensions in our world at the moment are because of the separation of nations and so on. Different cultures, different religions have developed in different ways. And to use a phrase which can be a bit condescending, this is not rocket science. The spiritual teachings are there in terms of the oneness of humanity. We've developed these religions and political systems, etc., as expedients. I mean, the religions, I should stick to really here, are attempts to understand the divine in terms of a particular culture at a particular point in time. And really, there is that underlying oneness there. You know, it's all humanity's strivings to reach the divine. Indeed, I would say that communism, which arose in the 19th century, I would count that as a religion as well in many ways. And like a lot of religions, like all religions, the idea itself is pure, but humanity tends to struggle. The problems and impurities within the human psyche, you know, if you look at the history of Christianity, the problems with that has been that propensity for power within the psyche, which has caused the teachings to be distorted and utilized for personal gain. And well, communism, it's a beautiful idea, but try putting it into practice. It's been disastrous in every area of the world where it's been tried. I don't want to stir up tension here politically, but without a spiritual basis, and communism does not have one in terms of its teachings, then I think it's doomed to failure. I could criticize the other systems as well, but I just happened to get onto that one when I was talking about religion.
That's a very interesting point you brought up, and that's I wanted to ask, do you think are there any astrological symbols that have been hidden through history?
Astrological symbol, or do you mean astrological meaning
Yes,
relating to the art? I am not sure, but of course, we had the discovery of Uranus at the time of the French Revolution, and those sort of qualities were then ascribed to Uranus. I think it's also important to bear in mind. There was a bit more to it, and that was the same period when a number of the Upanishads were introduced to the West by a Frenchman whose name I can't remember, but that is often neglected. I think about 50 of the Upanishads were brought to France at that particular time. The discovery of Neptune, which is a 6-ray planet, at that time there was a great revival in spiritualism. There was the New Thought movement in America, which is very Aquarian because it's about manifesting spiritual qualities on the physical plane. It's magic, taking something intangible and giving it tangible form. And that came about then. Then you had the Theosophical Society and its various offshoots. And then you had the discovery of Pluto in the 1930s, and you had the rise of fascism, which came after the Great Depression and so on. But that is a negative expression of Pluto, of course. Might is right.
And this is a fun question I'm just asking out of curiosity. If we were to migrate on Mars, do you think we would have to, the entire system of astrology would have to be rewritten because we would be standing on a different planet?
I've never been asked a question like that. We're still in the solar system. We would still have planets and houses, and well, the Earth is considered in the esoteric natal chart anyway. It's placed opposite the sun. In terms of the wisdom teachings, like the Earth, Mars is not considered a sacred planet, rather. The life that ensouls Mars has not taken what the wisdom teachings call the third initiation. It's not individuated in terms of Jung's teachings, and so I would expect challenges there as well. But I said that's clearly not going to happen. Well, in physical bodies, unless, of course, AI might lead. You know, we have space travel and so on. You're bringing up some immense questions here. Thinking, well, if we destroy the planet, then space travel will become imperative. Does Mars have enough oxygen for us to? I mean, we could exist at subtle levels here. As the wisdom teachings say, there is life at subtle levels on the other planets, but not physical. I like questions like that, though, because they absolutely throw me, because I'm just not used to taking questions like that from other astrologers or asking them questions myself.
It was just for fun. I would love to come back to your book. And is there anything you would love to share about the book today with the audience that I missed out on?
I'd probably like to state that, well, two things. It will be of value to traditional astrologers as well, if they want to look at the ascendant from a spiritual perspective. Esoteric astrology doesn't deny the traditional meaning of the ascendant as an interface between what's within the psyche and put out into the world and what is perceived from the outer world and goes into the psyche. We say that happens too, but we say there's also a spiritual purpose related to each of the rising signs. I have actually a friend who's a humanistic astrologer who said they're finding a lot of value in each of the chapters in terms of, encouraging clients towards spiritual development. And also the book is very accessible to non-astrologers as well. I've written it with that in mind. There are short examples at the end of each chapter where there are technical aspects to astrology, but I try to be as clear as I possibly can. I'm really offering these examples to show how this form of astrology works. So those two things, it's a value to any astrological practitioner. I would say more the ones who are interested in psychological, humanistic astrology, as opposed to, say, mundane astrology or horary astrology, etc. And secondly, it's accessible both for people from an astrological background and for people with spiritual aspirations who are not versed in astrology. Also, anyone now can go online and ascertain the rising sign, providing they know the date, place, and time of the birth. Time is very important, of course. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you for sharing all these insights. I will surely include your links, your website, soul-center-astrology.com.
Astrology.com. The book is available on douglasbakerbooks.com. If
Yeah.
anyone wants a signed copy, they can simply message me through my site, because if they buy one from my site, that goes straight to douglasbakerbooks.com, which is fine. But if anyone wants the book to be signed, please contact me directly, through the contact form or at my email address, which is listed there.
Okay, I'll link both of them, both the links, or do you want just
Please do. Yeah, you can just give them my email address as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gary. This was a wonderful conversation, and I would love to keep reconnecting with you. There is so much to learn from you. Thank you.
Of course, I love our interchanges. I love the spontaneity as well. I do actually enjoy getting hit with questions that I struggle a bit with, because my mental body, my mind's on the first ray of will and power. So it will sting me into action later to go and think about answers to them. Some I can, some I will never answer. They're beyond my comprehension, but some I will. So thank you so much, Suma. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, it was insightful and fun. Thank you.